So Keir Starmer's finally broken his silence on the whole "are we rejoining the EU or aren't we" debate. And spoiler alert, his answer is basically, well, yes, but actually no, but maybe sort of, but definitely not officially. Classic Starmer. The man could give a masterclass in saying absolutely nothing while using a lot of words. But here's the thing, this isn't just about political word games and semantic gymnastics. This is about 13 rebel Labour MPs who just voted to push the government toward joining an EU customs union, which has sent alarm bells ringing across Westminster and given Reform UK enough ammunition to fuel their campaign for the next decade. And Ruth Davidson, the former Scottish Conservative leader, has come out swinging with a warning that this entire debacle is basically political rocket fuel for Nigel Farage and his merry band of Brexiteers. So buckle up, because we're diving into what might be the most politically explosive, non-story story of the year. Let's start with what actually happened, because the details matter here. On Tuesday, a Liberal Democrat bill came before Parliament. Not a government bill, mind you, but a Lib Dem initiative that would require the government to begin negotiations on joining an EU customs union. Now, you'd expect Labour MPs to toe the party line and vote it down, right? That's how party discipline usually works. But 13 Labour MPs decided that party loyalty could take a back seat and voted in favor of the bill. 13. That's not an insignificant number. That's not just a couple of usual suspects causing trouble. That's a proper rebellion that suggests there's genuine appetite within the Labour Party for closer EU ties, regardless of what Starmer's official position might be. The bill has now passed to a second reading, which doesn't mean it's going to become law anytime soon, but it does mean the conversation is officially happening. Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, was absolutely delighted, calling it a historic victory against what he termed the economic nightmare of the Conservatives' broken Brexit deal. And you know what? Whether you're a diehard Brexiteer or a passionate Remainer, you have to admit Brexit hasn't exactly delivered the economic paradise that was promised. Trade barriers have increased, businesses are struggling with paperwork, and the economic benefits that were supposed to materialize are nowhere to be seen. So there's a legitimate argument to be made that some kind of closer trading relationship with the EU would be economically beneficial. But here's where it gets interesting. Keir Starmer has stated, quite clearly, that rejoining the EU customs union is not currently our policy. Note the word currently. That's doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. It's the political equivalent of saying, I'm not hungry right now when someone offers you cake, leaving the door wide open to being hungry later. Starmer knows he's walking a tightrope here. A significant chunk of his party and voter base would love nothing more than to reverse Brexit in all but name. But he also knows that huge swaths of the country, particularly in those red wall seats that Labour desperately needs to keep, voted for Brexit and meant it. They don't want to rejoin the EU. They don't want closer integration. They want the divorce to be final and complete. Enter Baroness Harriet Harman, Labour peer and political veteran who's been around Westminster long enough to know how the game is played. She gave an interview to Sky News where she basically laid out the strategy that Labour might employ to square this impossible circle. She confirmed that in the run-up to the election, Starmer made it quite clear that if he was in government, he would not be rejoining the single market or rejoining the customs union. Those were his exact commitments. But then, and this is where it gets deliciously cynical, she suggested that he could get around the problem much like Rachel Reeves did in the budget. Let's talk about that budget trick for a second, because it's genuinely brilliant in a Machiavellian sort of way. Rachel Reeves froze income tax thresholds. She didn't raise the rate of income tax itself, so technically she could stand up and say, I haven't raised income tax. But by freezing the thresholds while wages rise with inflation, more and more people get pushed into higher tax bands. It's called fiscal drag, and it means the government collects more tax revenue without technically raising tax rates. It's a stealth tax increase that allows politicians to claim they kept their promises while still extracting more money from taxpayers' pockets. Clever? Absolutely. Honest? That's debatable. So Harman is suggesting they could pull the same trick with the customs union. They won't rejoin the customs union, that's the promise, but they could create a customs union, a new arrangement that's not technically the EU customs union, but functions pretty much the same way. It would have elements of the customs union that smooth the path of better trading relations. In other words, it would walk like a customs union, talk like a customs union, and deliver the same benefits as a customs union. But it wouldn't officially be the EU customs union, so technically Starmer wouldn't have broken his promise. It's the political equivalent of your partner saying they're not getting back together with their ex, they're just spending a lot of time with someone who looks exactly like their ex and has all the same qualities. Now, before we get too deep into whether this is political genius or political suicide, let's talk about what the EU customs union actually is, because understanding the mechanics helps us understand why this matters. The EU customs union establishes what's called a common external tariff. This means all member states apply the same tariff to goods imported from outside the EU. Once goods are inside the union, they can move freely between member states without any additional customs checks or charges. It's basically one big tariff-free zone for internal trade with a unified approach to external trade. The union includes 27 EU member states, plus Monaco and the British Overseas Territory of Akrotiri and Dhekelia on Cyprus, making it the largest customs union in the world. The UK left this arrangement at the end of 2020 after the Brexit transition period ended, and the economic consequences have been, well, mixed at best. British businesses now face customs declarations, rules of origin requirements, and various regulatory checks when trading with the EU. This creates delays, increases costs, and makes UK goods less competitive in European markets. On the flip side, leaving the customs union theoretically gives the UK the freedom to negotiate its own trade deals with countries around the world, setting tariffs and trade policy independently. In practice, those independent trade deals haven't exactly revolutionized British trade, and many businesses would happily trade that theoretical sovereignty for the practical benefits of frictionless trade with our largest trading partner. So there's an economic case for some kind of customs arrangement with the EU. The question is whether the political cost is worth the economic benefit. And this is where Ruth Davidson's warning becomes absolutely crucial. She said, and I quote, "It would just be complete fuel for reform. I think politically it's too hard to do, even if economically it looks like a lever that could be beneficial to the country." That's a former Scottish Conservative leader, someone who campaigned for Remain, acknowledging that even if rejoining a customs union makes economic sense, the political ramifications would be catastrophic for Labour. Why? Because Reform UK would have an absolute field day. Nigel Farage would be on every news channel, every radio show, every social media platform, hammering home the message that Labour betrayed Brexit, that they promised to respect the referendum result, promised not to rejoin the single market or customs union, and then found a sneaky backdoor way to do exactly that. It wouldn't matter that technically they'd created a new arrangement rather than rejoining the old one. The optics would be disastrous. All those Leave voters who gave Labour a chance, who believed Starmer when he said he'd respect Brexit, would feel absolutely betrayed. And they wouldn't just stay home in the next election, they'd actively vote for reform out of pure spite. Davidson also pointed out that even if Labour decided to pursue this, the process would take months or even years to complete. You can't just wake up one morning and decide to join a customs union. There would be negotiations with the EU, legislative changes in Parliament, implementation periods, transition arrangements. It would dominate the political agenda for the entire remainder of this Parliament. Every single day would be consumed with Brexit debates all over again, just when most people thought we'd finally moved past that chapter. The country would be redivided along Leave and Remain lines. The culture war that briefly subsided would roar back to life with a vengeance. And through it all, Reform UK would be gaining support, gaining momentum, positioning themselves as the only party that actually respects democracy and the will of the people. This is Starmer's nightmare scenario. He's already struggling with membership losses, with declining poll numbers, with a perception that Labour doesn't really stand for anything distinctive. The last thing he needs is to hand reform a grievance that resonates with millions of voters. Because let's be clear, this isn't about the economic merits of customs unions or the technical details of trade policy. It's about trust, about promises made and kept, about whether politicians mean what they say or whether they're just telling you what you want to hear until they get into power and then do whatever they wanted to do all along. The 13 Labour MPs who voted for this bill either don't understand the political danger, or they're so committed to closer EU ties that they're willing to risk the party's electoral prospects to achieve it. Either way, they've created a massive headache for Starmer. He now has to navigate between keeping his Europhile wing happy, reassuring Leave voters that he's not secretly trying to reverse Brexit, and preventing reform from weaponizing this entire situation. It's political juggling of the highest order, and one slip could bring the whole thing crashing down. What makes this even more complicated is that Starmer probably does want some kind of closer relationship with the EU. Most sensible people, regardless of how they voted in the referendum, can acknowledge that the current arrangement isn't optimal. But wanting something and being able to achieve it politically are two very different things. Starmer is a political realist who understands that sometimes you have to accept less than ideal outcomes because the alternative is worse. He might look at a customs union and think this would be good for the economy, but also recognize that this would be political suicide. And when those two assessments conflict, pragmatic politicians usually choose political survival over economic optimization. The Lib Dems, on the other hand, have nothing to lose by pushing this agenda. They're the third party.